Glamour was 7 months pregnant. That night, her body felt heavier than ever, yet sleep had refused to stay with her. The wall clock struck midnight, its hand resting on 12, and she yawned loudly into the darkness. Slowly, she pushed herself off the bed, her swollen feet touching the cold tiles. Her nightgown clung loosely to her frame as she waddled towards the bathroom. All she wanted was to ease her bladder and return to sleep. The house was silent, almost too silent, the kind that made every step echo louder than it should. But just as she reached for the bathroom handle, a sound tore through the night. A sharp, piercing scream. It was not the sound of a neighbor. It was not the sound of the street. It was inside her own house. Glamour froze, her breath trapped in her throat. One hand pressed against her belly as if shielding her unborn child, the other still hovering in the air. Her skin crawled, and for a moment, she thought the scream had come from inside her very soul. The silence that followed was worse than the scream itself. Balaji had built a name for herself in the city. At least, that was the story she told everyone. In her early 40s now, she was a woman whose presence commanded attention. Her wardrobe was lined with velvet gowns, flowing silk dresses, and shimmering designer shoes. Her fingers glittered with rings that caught the light whenever she moved her hand, and her neck carried pearls and diamonds so radiant they seemed to whisper of a secret fortune. But behind her success was a life that few truly understood. Balaji had only one daughter, Glamour. She had given birth to her in her early 20s, raising her without the help of a husband. People often admired how strong she was, how she played the role of both mother and provider. They saw her attending parent-teacher meetings in tailored suits, her heels clicking like a declaration of victory, her daughter always neatly dressed beside her. What people didn't know was how quickly Glamour became the center of her entire life, and how deeply Balaji's ambition wrapped itself around the girl's existence. Glamour grew into a beautiful young woman, her name fitting her perfectly. Her eyes held a soft kindness, and her smile was the type that could silence a noisy room. Wherever she went, she carried light, and people often said she was the reason Balaji's life seemed complete. But the streets never stayed silent for long. Behind the tinted windows of cars, in the whispers of neighbors sipping coffee, and in the polished corners of beauty salons, a question lingered. How did Balaji become this rich, this fast? Some claimed it was pure business brilliance. Others insisted it was something deeper, something not easily explained. And though Balaji smiled brightly, her diamonds dazzling, there was always a shadow around her, one that seemed to grow heavier whenever Glamour was near. That night, as Balaji leaned back in her satin sheets, surrounded by the fragrance of imported perfume, she closed her eyes with a satisfied sigh. But just as sleep began to settle, a thought pricked her heart. Glamour's laughter had been fading. Her once bright spirit seemed quieter these days, almost as though it was dimming. Balaji brushed the thought away, adjusting her silk pillow. She didn't know it then. Her daughter's fading glow was only the beginning of the story that would soon turn her world upside down. The morning sun bounced off the tinted glass of Balaji's mansion windows, casting long streaks of light across her marble floors. From the outside, her life was flawless. Drivers at her gate, gardeners trimming her hedges, and the faint sound of classical music floating from her living room. She looked every bit the woman who had conquered life. But within the walls of her mansion, Silence grew heavier with each passing day. Glamour had changed. The girl who once filled the house with laughter, music, and endless questions now walked with a quietness that unsettled even the housemaids. She sat by herself more often, gazing out of the tall glass windows as though searching for something beyond the horizon. Balaji noticed, but the city whispered. In cafes where women gathered with painted lips and designer handbags, her name always slipped into conversations. She rose too fast. They would murmur over cups of cappuccino. Have you noticed her daughter? Always looking drained. Something isn't right. The whispers traveled further than she thought. Even the watchmen at the gate carried the talk into the night, lowering their voices whenever they mentioned glamour. At a charity gala one weekend, Balaji arrived in a gown that shimmered like flowing gold. She glided across the hall with glamour by her side, but when the cameras flashed, glamour's smile didn't reach her eyes. And when the speeches began, glamour quietly excused herself, disappearing into the shadows of the grand staircase. A few women noticed. They whispered again. She shines, but her daughter fades. Can't you see? Balaji pretended not to hear, raising her champagne glass and letting her laughter echo through the hall. But when she returned home later that night, she paused at Glamour's bedroom door. Her daughter sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, her face pale in the dim light. Balaji's diamond bracelets jingled as she reached for the doorknob, but she stopped. A shiver ran down her spine. She couldn't step in. She turned away, whispering to herself, "Everything I have, I built. Don't question it." The night was unusually still. The city, usually alive with honking cars and distant music, seemed to hold its breath. Balaji had just returned from a high-class dinner, her emerald gown trailing behind her as she stepped out of her black SUV. The driver carried her purse, the guards opened the gate, and the neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching her every move. But this night, something different happened. As Balaji walked across the driveway, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble pavement, a young mother carrying her baby stopped on the sidewalk. The woman admired Balaji's diamonds, the way her necklace caught the streetlights. She was about to greet politely when suddenly, her baby began to cry. At first, it was a soft whimper, but within seconds, the cry grew louder, sharper, almost as if the child was terrified of something unseen. The mother bounced him gently, whispering, "Shoo, it's all right, it's all right." "Go inside, madam," one of the guards whispered nervously, opening the gate wider. His eyes avoided hers. Balaji lifted her chin, forcing a smile, pretending not to care. She walked inside with heavy steps, but her heart raced. Behind her, the whispers started again. The neighbors leaned into each other's ears, their voices trembling. "She hides her secrets with diamonds," one muttered. "But even diamonds can't cover what is dripping from her spirit," another replied. And from that night on, no one looked at Balaji the same way again. The city's most prestigious hotel glowed that night, its chandeliers spilling golden light across a ballroom filled with music, laughter, and expensive perfume. Cars lined the entrance, and photographers flashed their cameras as women in silk gowns and men in tuxedos swept past the velvet ropes. Balaji arrived late, as always. She liked the entrance, the moment the entire room turned to watch her glide in. Tonight, she wore a gown made of silver sequins that shimmered with every step. Her diamond earrings caught the light, and her bracelets chimed like tiny bells announcing her arrival. Whispers followed her. Admiration, envy, suspicion. She smiled, sipping champagne, greeting important faces, moving with the poise of a queen. To anyone watching, she was untouchable. But then it happened. Across the hall, past the long table of wine glasses and glittering cutlery, stood Glamour. Her daughter. Balaji's heart skipped. She hadn't expected her. Glamour wasn't on the guest list. Yet there she was, wearing a soft white dress that seemed almost to glow under the light. She wasn't mingling, wasn't smiling, wasn't moving. She was just standing there, watching. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the noise of the party disappeared. The music dulled. The clinking glasses faded. Balaji felt her breath catch. She wanted to wave, to call out, but something held her tongue. Glamour's expression was not joyful. It wasn't angry either. It was sorrowful, hauntingly so, as though she carried a weight too heavy to bear. Balaji blinked. And just like that, the space where Glamour stood was empty. Her glass of champagne trembled in her hand, spilling a few drops onto her gown. She turned quickly, scanning the hall. No one else seemed to notice. Guests laughed, waiters moved. The music swelled again. It was as though nothing had happened. Yet Balaji's chest tightened. She excused herself to the restroom, gripping her purse with trembling hands. Inside, under the bright lights and marble sinks, she looked at her reflection. Her makeup was perfect. Her diamonds still glittered. But her eyes revealed fear. Whispering to herself, she said, "It's just my mind. Just exhaustion. Nothing more." But deep within, she knew what she had seen. Glamour had been there, watching her, reminding her, and the ghost of her choice was beginning to step into the light. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. Balaji had returned from the glittering party hours ago, but sleep refused to touch her eyes. She slipped into her silk nightgown, a flowing piece in deep burgundy, and let her diamond necklace rest lightly on her collarbone. The woman who could buy anything in the world suddenly longed for only one thing: peace. She walked into her private lounge, its walls lined with art pieces and golden lamps. A polished bar stood in the corner, filled with imported bottles. She reached for her favorite, an aged red wine, and poured herself a glass, the liquid catching the soft light like rubies. The room smelled of roses from the vases on the table. A soft jazz record played in the background. Everything was in place. Everything screamed perfection. Yet the silence behind it all pressed heavily on her chest. She lifted the glass slowly, admiring the deep color. But then her hand froze. In the swirling liquid, she saw not her reflection, but Glamour's. Her daughter's face stared back at her from inside the wine. Her eyes were heavy with sorrow, her lips trembling as if to speak, but no sound came. The glow of the chandelier above seemed to shine only on her reflection, as though the drink had turned into a mirror for the spirit itself. Balaji's breath quickened. She blinked once, twice, but the image remained. Glamour's face in the glass, closer, clearer. Her fingers trembled. The stem of the glass slipped, fell, and shattered against the marble floor.